Software Distribution, Part 1, The Art. All right, I think you're going to find this nugget to be a little bit shorter than the ones we've had thus far because we're not really going to talk about the Configuration Manager console so much. We're gonna preface the topic of software distribution first by talking a little bit with some whiteboard about the art of software distribution. And the reason why I put this in here is because I find a lot of people have some confusion about what exactly is software distribution, what does it do, what can you do with it, and how could you use it to manage the change inside of your environment. Now, we talk about software distribution, and the word software in software distribution is somewhat of a misnomer because the actual distribution of a package, which we'll talk about in a second, can really be anything. It doesn't necessarily need to be a piece of software, although it can in many cases. And considering it doesn't need to be, really any sort of executable, any sort of program that you can run on a client can be distributed and packaged up to be used as part of a software distribution. Now, all that being said, the main reason why Configuration Manager includes software distribution as part of its feature set is because one of the reasons why you install Configuration Manager is to automate the process of getting software out to your clients. In this nugget, we're going to spend some time talking about what is software distribution and really how we can use Configuration Manager to automate that process of software distribution, to eliminate the need to send out techs in the field and have them bring CDs and manually click next, finish to get the software installed onto our clients. How we can encapsulate software into this bundle that we call a package and then distribute it out to clients using a few simple mouse clicks. The process to do that really involves one step, and that is reconfiguring or repackaging the software so that it runs silently. And we'll talk about that. There are really three different kinds of software distributions. There's the MSI file type, there's the exe file type, and there's something I kind of call the diff type. And depending on what sorts of data you have in hand, some of these are a little easier to do than other ones. You'll find that MSI file types tend to have those silent switches built into the MSI file, and depending on what your application you use is to repackage them, it may be able to interrogate the file type and get those silent switches out of it. Exes have been around forever, right? Software installations as setup.exe has been around for as long as we've been around, as long as we've been doing with Windows. And so consequently, they're a little bit of a legacy in terms of what they can do. Not all exes include silent switches. And those that do, sometimes it's difficult to locate what those silent switches are. And so there's sort of a medium difficulty. And while the diff, or actually doing a differential based off of the before and after a piece of software is installed on a computer, can in some ways be easy, and in some ways can be very, very hard depending on what the complexity is of that software distribution. Again, in this nugget, we're not going to actually look at the clicky associated with doing software distribution, but we're going to talk about it from a high level so we can give you some understanding of not only what you need to know for the test, but also what you need to know in order to do software distribution best inside of your organization. I've brought up here a little graphic that I've built that talks a little bit about a change event. That's this item over here, a change event, and what we need to put together inside of Configuration Manager to enact change on our clients. Now, you'll notice that there are four different boxes here on the left. There's a big box here marked package, and that's actually the encapsulation of all the bits and bytes that we want to actually deploy to systems. And then intrinsic to this package, we also have a much smaller box here called the program. And what you'll find is the program is the command line, that which you would type at the command line in order to get a package to install, or in order to get essentially a process to begin doing something on a system. If that process happens to be a software installation, this program may be something as simple as setup.exe or setup.exe/quiet or some other command that you would type at the command line in order for that software to be installed. Now remember, anytime that we're deploying any sort of package to any sort of system, it is roughly the equivalent of literally clicking the start button and clicking run and typing in CMD. So if there's a command here that you can type at the command line and it will function appropriately, then we can do that as part of a software installation. We can do that as a part of a software distribution. So if I wanted, I could even run an ipconfig, for example, or I could run an nslookup or something like that on the system if I wanted to. Now, I wouldn't necessarily get any response back because I may have coded it to be hidden, or I may have coded it so that the user is not aware of it, but any sort of command that I run at the command line can be run as part of a Configuration Manager client software distribution. So maybe not ipconfig, but maybe setup.msi can be run at the command line. So you you see how powerful the client is in its ability to run virtually any executable or installation from the command line itself. So those are the packages and the programs. And then we have a little cylinder here to denote that there is some data, there are some files and registry key modifications essentially that goes into that package that's the actual installation media. That encompasses what we call the what. That is, what are we attempting to do? We also have what we call here is an advertisement. And an advertisement essentially encompasses when do we want to make this change. An advertisement tells the client, hey client, I have this package here that I'm looking to deploy to you, and according to this, I'm supposed to be installing that package at 3 a.m. this morning. And it's a mandatory advertisement so that I will be installing at 3 a.m. this morning as long as you're powered on. Or I can configure the advertisement to make it an optional advertisement. So after 3 a.m., you can choose when you want to install the package. So this advertisement really encompasses when do you want the change event to occur. The third component is the collection. The collection really says, okay, which systems or which computers, which servers, which workstations do you want to install the package to? So at a certain point, I have a certain number of machines that I want to install this package to using this program as the instantiation, using this program as the command line to start that package installation. The combination of these three things equals the change event, or the star here on the right. So you can see that there are a lot of different components that are involved with making this change event occur. If you've wondered why there are so many nodes inside of the Configuration Manager console and why there's such separation of elements inside of Configuration Manager, it's because we want to have this extensibility for how we're going to deploy packages. Now we have this extensibility because I may want to deploy Office 2007, for example, to all the laptops at 3 a.m. and all the desktops at 8 p.m. So I can have the same package going to different classes of computers at different times. I may at the same time want different computers to run different packages. So you can see here that this multi-pronged approach allows me to be very extensible in how I deploy things, when I deploy things, and also really who I deploy things to as well. Obviously, while we're talking about this too, some types of packages are going to be easier and harder than other types of packages. I have here kind of an arrow or a spectrum, if you will, that kind of spans the gamut between easy packages and hard packages that are to create. And really, depending on the type of package that you want, and depending on the level of customization that you want of those packages, you may find these to be a little bit different between them. But generally, the rule of thumb is that native MSI or Microsoft installer packages, these are those sorts of applications that install with the .msi as the 3-digit extension on the file. These tend to be the easiest types of packages to install because built into the MSI itself, right in that MSI database, that single file database is going to be the things that it needs to know in order to install the file quietly or silently. Again, what we need to ensure when we deploy packages is so that we don't actually have the installation screen come up and ask the user to click next. No. What we want is the package to install, the software installation to install completely without requiring any of the user's input in order to complete. So all of those silent switches are going to be encapsulated inside of that MSI file natively. You really don't have a lot of extra work involved with deploying that MSI because you can repackage it with the silent switches already enabled. Exe files may or may not have silent switches enabled with them at all. If you've ever installed a setup.exe, sometimes there's a /q or a /qb or a /quiet that goes behind the executable file that is a switch that instructs it to install without asking any questions. Now that of course depends on really the age of the exe, how the exe was built, what sort of application built the exe, and what the application is that you're trying to install. Now there are a lot of ways that you can go and test around to try to find what those silent switches are. For example, you can do a /?, so setup.exe/? may provide you a list of the silent switches for actually deploying the package silently. Another way that you can do it is to look on the internet to see if there are locations where you may find information about specific exe files and how they can be installed without prompting the user. In fact, we'll talk about that here in just a minute. The third component is what we call this diff that we talked about, and in some cases these differentials can be a little bit harder. The reason for this is because a differential involves a multi-step process. So let's think about this first. If we think of a software installation as nothing more than a series of registry keys that are installed to a system and a series of drivers and a bunch of files that get copied into certain locations, then if we think of it as that, it's merely just a file copy and some registry modifications. Then if we take a snapshot of an existing machine, let's say we have a golden image or a standard image that we've created of a computer, what if we snapshot every configuration, every file, every registry key, everything that has to do with that computer? Then we install the file. We install the piece of software, and it does all of its file copies, it does all of its registry key manipulations, and then after the installation is done, then we do another snapshot of the machine again, and we compare the second snapshot of the machine to the first snapshot of the machine and figure out what changed. This is what we call a diff, or a differential. Once we know what changed, what files, registry keys, and everything changed between the first snapshot and the second snapshot, we can encapsulate that into an installation that does that automatically does those file copies for us. In order to be able to do a lot of this packaging, you're going to need, in addition to Configuration Manager, you're going to need a packager tool as well. Some of the packages you will be able to actually use directly from the command line, but in some cases you need to be able to do those packages. This is especially the case when you're involved with doing some of these diffs. You need to have a tool that can actually do the snapshotting, that can do the comparison, and then can encapsulate the changes into a package that you can then use later on. So consider the use of a packager tool whenever you're beginning the process of installing your Configuration Manager instance. Admin Studio has a package, Wise has a package as well. I believe there's a free version of Admin Studio for Configuration Manager as well that you can use in order to do a lot of these packaging tools. Once you have that packaging tool in place, just remember some of the following ideas when we talk about the art of collecting packages and setting packages. Remember too that packages don't always necessarily need to be software installations. They can be really anything that can be run at the command line. Those packages are really just codified configuration changes to machines. That means that a registry change, a file change, any kind of configuration change can all be wrapped up into a package. And really, it's outside the scope of the test, it's outside the scope of this series, but the packager tools are very complex and very, very rich in the feature sets that they can provide you for working with MSIs, working with XEs, and even working with those differentials. Windows Group Policy does constant configuration changes that repeat and validate over time, but it's hard to really see what's going on. It's hard to really verify what's going on through reporting. So even if you have Group Policy in place, you may find that Configuration Manager can do some things that Group Policy may not necessarily be able to do in your Active Directory. It's more challenging to do a one-time change using Windows Group Policy, in some cases even with Group Policy preferences. And a package can be set to run once, and you can follow its success through the reports module. You can follow how well that package is being deployed across your environment through the reports. Collections are very, very critical to good package deployment. I think as we said in the collections nugget, we want to make sure that those collections are very tightly targeted to ensure that you distribute your packages to the right locations and to the right computers that require those packages. And there's going to be some art, as we talked about before, to making sure you build those collections using the right queries. One way that you can do it is what these things called inverse collections. Inverse collections are a way of setting up a collection to look for where software is not. So let's think about this for a second. We can create a collection that says all computers and deploy a package to all computers, but that's only marginally helpful. Let's say we want to target machines. Let's say we want to target an update to computers that are currently have Office 2003, and we want to target who has Office 2007. We could create a collection that says, show me all the computers with Office 2003. Or we could create an inverse collection that says, show me the computers that don't have Office 2007. So you think about this for a second. What I'm creating is a collection of machines that I essentially want to deploy to. When that collection empties out to 0, then I know that I have completely installed all those applications. And it says down here at the bottom that inverse collection allow for a repeated deployment that ensures success. So think about these best practices when you're going through actually creating your initial packages and creating your collections. These are not necessarily useful for the test, but for whenever you're actually building your configuration manager infrastructure and going through the process of creating some of your first packages, be aware of some of the art associated with building those packages and targeting those packages. One thing else I wanted to show you too in this nugget as well was a website that helps with some of this package creation. This website is appdeploy.com. And in here you can see for different types of packages, in this case Acrobat Reader 7.x, we can see some good information for how to deploy those packages. Here you can see here that the quiet install string for Adobe Acrobat is equal to the Acrobat that's installer.exe file /s/v/qn. Very, very easy. I can just very simply put that into my deployment, put that into my software distribution, create a package out of it, and bam, I very easily install Adobe Acrobat onto systems. Another tool that's out here, for example, the JRE 1.x. If I click down here as well, you can see that it's the installer.exe/qn. Again, very, very easy to deploy these because I've gone to this website, and the information on this website shows me a lot of really good, useful tips for deploying software and the tricks you need in order to deploy it appropriately. One last example of this is TechSmith Snagit, for example, which also uses MSI. In this case, the installation string here, this is the uninstall string for msiexec.exe if you want to install it. The installation string involves some additional components. Maybe you need to repackage the application to include some elements in a property table or modify some registry keys here as well. All of this is available inside of this website, which is sort of a clearinghouse of information about the deploying of packages and about the reconfiguration of packages through your configuration manager infrastructure. So really, what have we talked about today? We've talked about the art of software distribution, and this is part 1 of software distribution. In the next nugget, which is part 2, we're going to take what we learned about the art and code that into configuration manager and call that the science of software distribution. Here we've talked about the process of automating software distribution and some silent switches that you have to be aware of, and you have to program into those reconfigured packages in order to make them function so they don't actually prompt your users when they automatically deploy. We talked about the types of software distribution, MSI, exe, and diff types, all of which can either be used directly inside of Configuration Manager or in some cases may involve a separate packaging utility to assist with the process. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.